welcome everyone. Can move to the next slide. So welcome everyone to the webinar for the launch of the version 2, public consultation for the version 2 of the SBTN Land Methods. Thank you for attending this webinar. Before we get started, just want to go over a couple housekeeping notes. This webinar is going to run for about an hour. You will be muted as an attendee. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. We will have a Q&A session at the close of this webinar. A recording of this webinar will be shared later. We encourage you to share it with your networks that you think may be interested in this work and the consultation. Well, as I already said, it's a pleasure to welcome you all to this exciting moment, the launch of the public consultation for the version 2 of the SBTN Land Methods. I'm Varsha Vijay, the Technical Director of the Science-Based Targets Network. Before we dive into the land methodologies, I wanted to provide some context on SBTN. Many of you are already familiar with our work or with the Science-Based Targets Initiative, or SBTI, the global standard for setting science-based targets for climate. The Science-Based Targets Network, or SBTN, builds on that work by developing science-based targets for nature, covering freshwater, land, ocean, with biodiversity integrated therein. That acknowledges the reality that addressing the nature crisis is critical for solving the climate crisis. Specifically turning to our land targets, they support biodiversity by comprehensively addressing habitat loss, unsustainable land use practices, some of the primary drivers of terrestrial biodiversity loss globally. So that's why SBTN takes an integrated approach. Our technical hubs focus on these key systems, helping companies take action that's credible, coordinated, and aligned with ecological thresholds. Excitingly, companies can now set the first science-based targets for land, freshwater, and most recently with the launch of our ocean methods for ocean, focused initially on the seafood sector. Our approach enables companies to scale from focused action to comprehensive science-based targets for nature. By aligning actions across these systems, companies can take enough of the right actions in the right places at the right time to do their part to halt and reverse nature loss by 2030. And to enable companies to set science-based targets for nature, SBTN has designed a 5-step approach that builds on existing corporate practices. This process takes companies from assessing their impacts on nature throughout their value chains in our step 1 of our methods to identifying what parts of their business and which locations they should prioritize for target setting in step 2, to setting targets in step 3, and then actions to meet these targets in step 4. In alignment with the mitigation hierarchy, which means first avoiding and reducing pressures, but also investing in regeneration and restoration where impacts have already occurred. And finally, closing this approach with monitoring, reporting, and verifying progress against those targets in our step 5. The draft land methods that are out for public consultation are specific to setting targets or our step 3 methods. So it's important to answer the question, why science-based targets for nature? We are very aware that many companies already set environmental goals, but science-based targets raise the bar. They strengthen credibility, improve consistency, and drive real impact. They're ambitious and quantifiable. Science-based targets give companies clarity on what's enough, defining and quantifying how much action is needed by companies based on Earth's limits and aligned with global societal goals like the Global Biodiversity Framework and the UN's SDGs. They're also standardized and collaborative. Science-based targets use consistent methodologies that allow companies to align efforts, measure progress, and collaborate effectively across shared supply chains and landscapes with other local actors. They're also aligned and interoperable with other key frameworks. Science-based targets are designed to work with major disclosure frameworks like TNFD and CSRD, strengthening reporting, increasing efficiency, and preparing companies for future regulatory expectations. Finally, science-based targets are rigorous and strategic. SBTN offers a structured, comprehensive, data-led approach that leads to science-based decisions that ultimately strengthen operational continuity and resilience and help integrate environmental action into core business strategies. And finally, they are credible and independently validated. And that's an important point. They're backed by science and civil society and independently validated by the Accountability Accelerator so that the targets stand up to scrutiny from investors, regulators, and customers alike. As we move on to thinking about feasibility, at SBTN, we believe in the urgency of science-based action. That's why we're working hard to balance rigor with feasibility through flexible entry points, business-driven prioritization, and a phased approach that meets companies where they are and guides them towards where they need to go while ensuring accountability through validation and claims. For example, we help companies start where they're ready so they can focus on high-impact and well-prepared business units. They can prioritize what matters most. They can focus on high-impact commodities and grow value chain traceability over time. And they can also start by setting targets on specific realms or biomes. For example, by focusing on first setting targets for land, though we aim for comprehensive coverage over time. We welcome you to explore our feasibility pathways through the QR code that you see on this slide. Turning to the land targets, the focus of this webinar, I want to just ground us in why the land targets matter so much. First, they apply a credible science-based approach to improving land impacts where it matters most. SBTN's land methods provide a broadly endorsed framework built by civil society for companies to understand and act on their land-related impacts. The new version 2 draft methods out for public consultation enable companies to take more effective actions informed by ecological thresholds and landscapes they operate and source from, and including indicators of ecosystem condition or land quality. That evolves from prior focus primarily on indicators of land use and extent. So that's an exciting evolution in the science that SBTN is doing. But SBTN land methods are also really good for businesses. They safeguard operations and supply chain resilience by mitigating systemic risks. Most corporate supply chains rely on lands. We have strong science behind that, including through agriculture, forestry, and infrastructure. But habitat loss and degradation, biodiversity loss, and climate change are increasing the risk of raw material shortages and production disruptions, particularly in commodity-based supply chains. SBTN land targets help companies build that resilience and stability by identifying and managing risk to operations and supply chains earlier, anticipating them. This approach enables companies to reduce exposure to regulatory and reputational risk as well, and also to prepare for nature and climate-related shocks to come. They also align and strengthen climate and nature strategy and synergies. Nature targets complement climate targets by addressing additional drivers of nature loss, including moving from deforestation to conversion-free, addressing pollution, and helping companies build a more comprehensive and credible nature and climate strategy. Companies can also take credible action now with version 1. And I think that's a really important point for us to emphasize in this webinar. Version 1 of the land targets is already available and provides a clear science-based path to begin reducing land impacts today. So there's no reason to wait to act. Version 2, which we anticipate launching in 2026, will expand the scope and offer greater flexibility, building on version 1, but not replacing it. So companies that are starting now will have an advantage because these new methods will be compatible. So early action now through version 1 aligns with the future direction of the methods. And with that, it's my pleasure to hand over to Alex Wolof and Craig Beatty, co-leads of the SBTN Land Hub. Thanks.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Varsha, and very excited to get to speak to everyone here today and to get to kick things off on behalf of the Land Hub. So as Varsha mentioned, my name is Alex Wolof. I'm co-lead of the Land Hub with Craig Beatty, who you'll also hear from in a minute. And I'm from Conservation International, where I'm the vice president in our science division there. So we could shift to the next slide. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start first with a high-level overview of some of the proposed changes in version 2. And then I'm going to hand over to some of my colleagues who will provide some more details on the proposed changes, and then, of course, on the consultation process itself. So what's new? What's new in version 2 of the land guidance? So the first thing that I'm very excited about is the new science that we've done to guide action. So version 2 includes the introduction of place-based thresholds at the ecoregion scale. And the idea here is to really enable companies to better understand the ecological limits of the landscapes that they operate in or source from. And the idea here is that together with land environmental assessment factors, which we'll hear a bit from Chris Loyal at WWF in a second, the idea here is that through the introduction of these two concepts, we can focus efforts towards those places and towards those interventions that are most needed and that are most likely to have meaningful impact for nature. The other important piece that's new in version 2 is the accounting guidance, or AGIL, which you see there at the right-hand bottom of the slide, the accounting guidelines for impacts on land use and the environment. And the idea of the AGIL framework is to include robust and consistent approaches to understanding and measuring corporate impacts on land that's really in alignment with best practices and standards. So we've worked closely with some of our partner organizations like the AFI, and then also, of course, following the Greenhouse Gas Protocol Land Sector Removals Draft Guidance, the LSRG. And then very importantly, and I think Varsha spoke to this a little bit, a key thing that we've had in our minds, particularly given the experience that we've had working with companies on version 1, is the need to improve flexibility and also to think about feasibility of implementation of the methods. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's new in a second, but I do just want to highlight one thing that we've been cognizant of is being able to provide companies flexibility in terms of implementation, while still, of course, meeting the needs and the level of ambition that's really needed to deliver for nature. So for example, within Target 2, which I'll talk in a bit more detail about in a second, there's the potential to talk about, to consider between two different land area targets. And then also within the land quality component, there's flexibility in terms of the indicators that a company might focus on. Lastly, and Craig will speak to this in more detail, we're also cognizant of the needed progress on the deforestation front, and we've released new guidance in relation to the 2025 target date. So what no conversion target dates actually look like for companies given where we are now. So if we can shift to the next slide. So the biggest changes, as I mentioned, that you'll see are in Target 2. We're going to talk through Target 1 and 3 at the end, but we're going to spend the bulk of the webinar talking about some of the changes that come in Target 2, because that's really the target that we have the most proposed changes to relative to version 1. So you'll remember in version 1, we had a target around land footprint reduction. In version 2, we've actually split that target, renamed it, and split it into two components. The new name within version 2 is Working Land Regeneration and Restoration. So the land area target, which again, I'll talk more detail about in a second, is the most similar to what was included in version 1. And the idea of the land area target is to capture the importance of land sharing and land sparing. So we know, of course, that there's a need for reduction in total agricultural land area through land sparing, but we also know that there's a need for embedding of nature within working lands or land sharing. And so we've really been, this theory of change is built into that target, which again, I'll talk more detail about in a second. The other new piece in version 2 is the land quality target. And the idea of the land quality target is to capture the need for restoration and regeneration within working lands. The idea of land quality target is in part to act as a safeguard, ensuring that, for example, actions that might be taken to reduce agricultural land footprint through through increases in intensity of production don't lead to land degradation in the longer term. So we have a number of indicators, which actually, if we slip to the next slide, that integrate within that land quality target in order to capture this. So what does this actually look like in practice? So what you see here is splitting out those two components I just talked about on the left-hand side, land area and land quality, the two key components of Target 2. So each company will set at minimum a land area and a land quality target. So it looks like there's 5 on here. Of course, we'd encourage companies, if they're able to and have the data and it's feasible, to act across these areas, but the minimum is 1 land area target and 1 land quality target. The land area piece has 2 components. So as I mentioned before, there's a land footprint reduction target or the option of a natural land cover target. So as you see on the top of the slide, companies that have a material link to agriculture, i.e. if they produce or source agricultural products, they can choose to set either a land footprint reduction target and or a natural land cover target. Other companies will set a natural land cover target only. So what is this natural land cover target? This is something that's new that we've introduced based really on the latest science that's been done since version 1. So we do have science to indicate that maintaining nature's contributions to people requires at least 20 to 25% of semi-natural habitat in human-modified landscapes. The idea of this natural land cover target is really to capture that within the target setting framework. So the idea here is that a company might set a target to maintain natural land cover or increase natural land cover to 25% per square kilometer. What then is the land quality piece? So the land quality target has 3 potential components. Again, the idea here of the land quality target is to capture the need for restoration and regeneration of working lands. And what we've done is we've focused these targets towards 3 things that are, of course, very important in terms of the drivers of biodiversity loss, but that also are able to feasibly be monitored by companies. So there's 3 different potential targets here. The first is a soil organic carbon target. We know that SOC is a key indicator of soil quality. The second is a soil erosion target. We know, of course, that soil erosion, particularly through water, can be accelerated by a range of human activities, including, of course, tillage practices. And then third is a terrestrial acidification target. And we know, of course, that terrestrial acidification can reduce fertility, plant species diversity and richness, can affect native species, and that, of course, agricultural activities are a key contributor to the release of nitrogen and sulfur. I'm not going to read through just for the sake of time, but if you look at the far right hand of the slide, you see 3 examples of, or sorry, 1 example per target of what those might actually look like. So one piece that I have not talked about that you see referenced on the slide is if we look, for example, at the soil organic carbon target, that target is phrased as set target to maintain SOC or increase SOC to 10% above the ecoregion threshold. What is this ecoregion threshold? So this is a new concept that we're introducing in version 2 of the guidance, and I'm pleased to hand over to Jordan Rogan with Conservation International, who's been leading this work, and we'll speak a bit more about the role that ecoregion thresholds play within the version 2 guidance. Over to you, Jordan.
Thank you, Alex. As Alex mentioned, I'm Jordan Rogan. I'm a Senior Manager of Conservation Science and Ecosystem Resilience at Conservation International. And I'm going to talk a bit about the ecoregion thresholds, which are meant to guide target ambition to manage and restore ecoregion stability. Next slide. Okay, so what are the thresholds and why are they important? So defining what nature needs on a place-based level is a critical question that we aim to answer through the identification of ecological thresholds for land, both in terms of avoiding further ecosystem degradation and loss, as well as defining how much is enough in terms of the restoration actions needed to support the system in returning to a stable state if a threshold has been crossed. So for our purposes, an ecological threshold is considered the point in an ecosystem quality, property, phenomenon, or environmental driver where an often abrupt and nonlinear decline in the corresponding ecosystem state is detected. So how are these thresholds integrated into the guidance here? And they are specifically integrated into Target 2 primarily. So as Alex just reviewed, there are 3 land quality targets that have been added to Target 2 in version 2 of the land guidance, in the working land regeneration and restoration target, for which ecoregion thresholds have been derived. So again, that's soil organic carbon, soil erosion, and terrestrial acidification. So thresholds are intended to serve as a safeguard to describe the point at which an ecoregion may be in danger of significant loss of stability and normal functioning if the threshold is exceeded in that ecoregion. Thresholds thereby serve to inform the level of ambition of the land targets in terms of the restoration and regenerative action that may be needed to maintain stability in an ecoregion or restore it back to a higher zone of stability. Companies that are required to set targets under Target 2 land quality will use these thresholds to thereby guide the ambition of the targets that they set for each land quality category as shown above. And those targets are set at a 10% safe distance from ecoregion thresholds. And I will now pass it off to Chris Loyola to talk about the land environmental assessment factors.
Thank you, Jordan. My name is Cristóbal Loyola. I'm a manager at the forest team on the at WWF. and I'm going to explain you how the Land Environmental Assessment Factors, or LEAF, are going to help you link your corporate activities to the ecoregion threshold that Jordan was just explaining. Next slide. So how are these integrated within Target 2? First of all, we want to highlight that this is linked to your direct operations. Once you have gone through step 1, step 2, and begin step 3, you will have collected an inventory of direct operations, and you will have 2 quantities right there. You will have defined what are your land uses in the different parts of the world, and you're going to have defined your acidification emissions. LEAF are going to make able to translate these amounts into the SOG, soil erosion, and terrestrial acidification, specifically for each of the different ecoregions that you are working on, and be able to compare with the ecoregional thresholds so you can set targets. So what are LEAF? These are numerical factors that help translate your company's activities into different indicators that I have just mentioned. They represent the estimated land quality indicator for each of the relevant inputs that you have in that specific place of the Earth. And if you're thinking that this sounds very similar to what life cycle assessment characterization factors are, it is because they are similar. We have taken that concept and have modified it actually to be able to work with the thresholds so you can compare it directly what you have on the land and what the ecoregion thresholds need. We worked this during the past 2 years with the Norwegian University of Science and Technology to select which are the best methods, and we have worked then so far to adapt them more into something that companies can use in a very easy way. So back to you, Craig.
Great. Well, thanks to Chris and Jordan. A really excellent description there of science advances that underpin the updates to our land targets. So next, I'd like to move to the other 2 targets and to our accounting guidelines. So target 1, you'll recall, is our no conversion of natural ecosystems target, and target 3 is our landscape engagement target. So together with our revised target 2 on working land, regeneration, and restoration, companies will be able to use science-based targets to transform commodity markets and how those commodities are understood, how they're produced and purchased in the context of land and its ecosystems, as well as engaging directly in places where a company's operations are sourcing our materials. So uniting that market transformation approach with companies engaging in places where they have materiality. Next slide. Oh, sorry, we're already there. So here are the main updates for target 1 on no conversion and target 3 on landscape engagement. So for both, the core objective of the target really remains the same. So for target 1 on no conversion, there are 2 updates. So first, for companies that are not able to meet a no conversion target date of 2025 within our target setting framework, companies may now acknowledge that 2025 is a target date that will be overshot, and committing to a target date within a defined window, and providing justification to the accountability accelerator, who are the institution that validates corporate targets, for the barriers that companies have in achieving target dates for individual commodities in their operations or supply chains. So that's the first main change to our no conversion of natural ecosystems target. Secondly, SBTN now strongly that companies remediate any conversion identified as part of the no conversion target assessment, or the progress that they make between when a company sets their cutoff date and when they hope to achieve their no conversion. So that is a recommendation now for remediation. I'll also quickly mention that in between the launch of version 1 and the public consultation for version 2, we did make a few updates to SBTN's natural lands map, which is really key for companies in being able to set the baseline for this no conversion target. So there were some mapping updates to that, which really make that map a lot better and a lot more indicative of what is natural and what is not natural in 2020. So I want to mention that as well. For target 3, recommended that companies utilize those eco-regional thresholds now that we've developed to help prioritize those landscapes for investment. And there's a specific consultation question regarding how or if there should be a prioritization process for identifying such places in Target 3. And then finally, for companies with large upstream commodity volumes in Target 2, our working lands regeneration and restoration target, we have strengthened the connections between that target and the landscape engagement target to ensure that companies consider natural land cover and or land quality in the implementation of their landscape engagement targets. Next slide. So I'll round out the updates to the land targets by briefly describing the accounting guidelines for impacts on land use and the environment, our agile guidelines, which Alex mentioned earlier. Next slide. So the purpose of agile is to provide companies with accounting and calculation methods so that they can understand and measure the components of their land impacts that we utilize in target setting. So Agile supports that development of company baselines and the measurement of corporate footprints for each target. The development of Agile relied on a lot of collaboration, especially with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol as they developed their land sector and removals guidance. So it also relied on liaising with the Accountability Framework Initiative and a lot of other organizations, but really a lot of what you'll see in the accounting guidelines is similar or includes text from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol's land sector and removals guidance, which is still in draft form. So some of that might change in the future, but a lot of this accounting guidance was based on how Greenhouse Gas Protocol is thinking about this in the context of that document. So carbon, as we know, has had really decades of experience in accounting, and for nature, this is relatively new. So for Agile, we'd really appreciate your keen eyes and your attention on this document in particular during the consultation. So next slide. So the structure here of the accounting guidelines, we are providing instructions here for setting the inventory and target boundary, for addressing traceability and the spatial boundaries for accounting, and then we'll outline what data are required for completing the process. So for understanding the environmental impacts, Agile covers all of the land targets, but provides really exceptional guidance for the accounting and calculation of impacts related to land area. So looking at land footprint calculation and assessing natural land cover, as well as calculating soil organic carbon, soil erosion, and terrestrial acidification. So the land impact categories have been included based on their capacity to address the maximum coverage of pressures that are responsible for most companies and their impacts on land, the availability of quantifiable and measurable metrics that can be feasibly impacted by company activities to make progress against, the alignment with active and relevant corporate sustainability standards and initiatives, and the ability to incentivize action across our AR3T framework. So that's what we're looking for. In addition, the guidelines really provide methods for companies to measure improvements from the implementation of those select response options. So Agile, along with our target setting guidance, provide companies with a clear framework for the information, the tools, and the resources that companies will need to set science-based targets for land. Next slide. Of course, we're looking for your feedback, your suggested edits, your comments, and your philosophies during our public consultation, which is active now. So I expect all 500 of you and your colleagues will go to the public consultation documents to make our lives dynamic and interesting as we review and respond to your thoughts and perspectives. We really invite broad and inclusive feedback on the draft methods. The consultation, I think, as was mentioned before, is open until May 27th, and we really welcome input from everyone. But we're especially keen to hear from companies, from consultants, people in finance and financial institutes, from non-governmental organizations, people involved in policy making, academics, researchers, research institutes, indigenous peoples, faith-based groups, and youth organizations. We're especially eager to hear from experts in sustainability, ecology, land management, environmental risk, and companies as well. So your insights are really going to help ensure that this guidance is both scientifically robust and practical for corporate action. And we always try to remember that we must balance what ambitions we have and the need for nature and the needs that we have around the planet, considering climate change and biodiversity loss, really with the feasibility of setting and achieving targets in corporate context. So this is always a line that we walk, and we recognize that most folks sit on one side or the other of that line, and we see that in public consultation. So we're really looking forward to your engagement in our public consultation. Maybe before we move to questions and answers, if we go to the next slide, I'd like to take this opportunity really to recognize the Land Hub member organizations that developed this guidance, including Conservation International and WWF, as well as the World Resources Institute, the Nature Conservancy, and with a lot of support from the Food and Land Use Coalition, with support from Systemic and KPMG. So this work really was made possible by the funding and the patience, honestly, of the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, Norway's International Climate and Forest Initiative, the Robert Bosch Stiftung, and the Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors as the fiscal sponsor of the Science-Based Targets Network. So I think with that, we can move into the question and answer session, and I will turn it over to whoever is leading that. Thank you.
Great. I think we have a couple of questions to highlight, hopefully for Craig and Alex to take on. There were a few consistent themes in the Q&A. The first one was just explaining a little bit more how the version 2 of the SBTN land methods complement SBTI flag targets, as well as the LSRG guidance. So I will hand over to you guys to answer that.
I guess I can start, and obviously, Craig, if you want to add anything, Ray, the LSRG. But certainly, we're obviously in conversation with our partner organizations and have been in touch regarding the LSRG to ensure that what we, particularly within Agile, within the accounting guidance, is in alignment with the draft version of the LSRG. Similarly, within Flag, we have retained, as in version 1, those companies that would be required to set a target under Flag, per the requirements of Flag, are required to set a Flag target in order to validate their SBTN target. So we do seek alignment with both, and obviously are in close communication with our colleagues there. I don't know if there's anything you'd want to add, Craig.
No, just that as we're developing Agile, a lot of it focused on what companies are already being asked to do as part of land sector and removals guidance. So as much as possible, we had a big question during the development of this guidance, whether we consistently just point people to the land sector removals guidance, or if we integrated some of that text into our accounting guidance for land targets. We opted to integrate that into the text so that folks didn't have to jump between one document to the next. And of course, recognize from the folks working on the LSRG that is not final yet. And so the text that's in our document right now is draft text from land sector removals guidance. And presumably much of it will remain the same. But it is integrated into our accounting guidance to make it align as much as possible, considering that carbon accounting and land accounting are sometimes different, but they do share a lot of similarities. So where those similarities align, you'll be able to see that in the accounting guidance.
Thank you both. Another consistent question that we received was about the coverage of science-based targets for nature in the value chain. So could I hand to both of you to explain how science-based targets address not just direct operations impacts, but also those of the upstream value chain? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So what we've in the first annex of the land methods, what you'll find is a list of commodities. So what I think we'd originally called them were global conversion driving commodities and regional conversion driving commodities. So there are those lists of EUDR commodities that are on the front page, if I could say it that way, of global conversion, but regionally there are other commodities that are part of that. So for companies setting science-based targets for land, those commodities are the entry point. And so for some companies, that'll be through the production of those commodities or the extraction of those commodities. And then probably for a lot more companies, it'll be a mix of those commodities that form part of your supply chain or your value chain. And so in the way that the targets work is that companies responsible both for commodities that are a part of that list as a part of their direct operations. So the production and extraction of those, as well as how those commodities are utilized in the value chain. So that includes sourcing from the first points of aggregation. So and this is also included in the annex, what the first point of aggregation is for a lot of those commodities. And then for also sourcing from further on down from the first point of aggregation. And we recognize that as you get further away from production or the first point of aggregation, that the traceability of those commodities becomes a lot more challenging. And so the target dates around how companies set those targets for those commodities are very flexible or more flexible based on the distance from production across value chains. But the focus is on, of course, direct operations, as well as how those commodities are integrated into value chains. Alex, would you add anything else?
No, you covered it well, Craig.
All right.
We have a couple more questions. One question that we received is around how companies can access and use eco-regional thresholds. So I will hand it to both of you and perhaps to Jordan to cover both how those are determined and how companies can access them.
I can get started while Jordan comes off mute, and I'll let her cover the how our thresholds determined portion of the question, because obviously she's the science expert there. So you'll notice there is a supplement that we released for consultation that includes an example of a set of the LEAFs, the land environmental assessment factors, as well as thresholds for a number of ecoregions around the world. So the idea here was to give an example data for the folks as you review during the consultation. We have not yet released the entire data set of thresholds. And so Jordan is leading that work, but that data will be made available, of course, prior to final release. It's also going to be submitted for peer review as well and publication. And then actually one other thing I want to note through version 2 is we have had a tools work stream led by TNC. And the idea here has not been to develop a new tool or a new platform. We all know that there are tools and platforms out there that already exist to support companies in many of the tasks that are needed to set targets. However, the goal there has been to ensure that the data products that come out from the Land Hub will be available and able to be integrated within some of those existing tools. So through that tools work stream, TNC has been working with key data providers, key tool providers to ensure that some of the intricacies of data formats, et cetera, are worked out to make sure that access to the actual final data sets can be facilitated. But Jordan, I don't know if you want to speak a bit more about how the ecoregion thresholds are determined.
Yeah, I think you covered that very well. As Alex mentioned, the full methodology will be released for publication and be put under peer review by scientific experts. So currently there is a brief overview of the methodology to derive the thresholds, but that methodology was led by us at Conservation International in collaboration with research experts at ETH-Zurich and the Crowther Lab and the University of Madrid Complutense, as well as with support from the University of Washington. But if you want an overview in the there is one in the public consultation within Annex 3. And then once that is released for publication, we will also share that with the official launch of version 2, so you can get the full methodology for the threshold.
Wonderful. Thank you all for those answers. I'm going to pause here to see if there are any additional questions that the team would want to highlight here for answering live. Feel free to come off mute.
Barsha, I think there's a question on just clarifying the difference between land area and land quality targets under Target 2.
Okay, great. So can you clarify the difference in interlinkages between land area and land quality targets under Target 2? So I'll hand over to to Craig and Alex to answer.
Yeah, sure. So the way that we've restructured the second target, which formerly was the land footprint reduction target, and was only applicable to large agricultural companies. And so part of what this target does is open up the target setting on land area and land quality to a larger swath of sectors. And part of doing that was using some science from the Earth Commission on land area. And so looking at the science that they have on what coverage of natural land or semi-natural land is required to maintain ecosystem services at a landscape scale. And that science pointed to 20 to 25% natural land. And so part of that target is around looking at either operations or kind of subnational supply sheds or jurisdictions to look at what is the coverage of natural land in relation to operations and sourcing. And the way that that shakes out in the target really depends on if you're looking at and you have production unit data or if you're looking at a more distributed upstream kind of supply shed or just jurisdictional knowledge on what natural land cover is at different scales. And then for the land quality targets, what we're doing is taking that information on production areas or sourcing areas, or production units or sourcing areas, and really trying to use the accounting guidance to baseline and understand what the land quality indicators are in those places. And so we can look at soil organic carbon and calculate kind of what the soil organic carbon baseline is. We can look at terrestrial acidification and look at what the company baselines are for that land quality indicator. We can also look at soil erosion. And so what we're doing is both matching up kind of a general coverage of natural area in working lands with those quality indicators that indicate for us a measurable value for kind of some components that we can measure around land quality. And then we match those up to what the thresholds for each of those indicators are within the ecoregions that we're talking about. So whether we're talking about production units or sourcing areas, they'll both be associated with ecoregional thresholds based on where they are. And so for companies, they'll have a much better understanding, I think, around for the commodities that they're sourcing, where those commodities sit kind of in a resilience context for the sourcing or production of those commodities in the places. So it really, I think, brings a lot more actionable information to science-based target setting for land, because you can really pin down the values that you're going to have to hit in order to meet what nature needs, as we say a lot of the times. So really, this target is exciting in the way that it's been able to do that. We're working on science for this does anyone else have anything they might want to add? Maybe I rambled a little bit and didn't answer the question. I
think you got it well. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just add, and this is responsive definitely to some of the feedback that we got in version 1 around, for example, regenerative agriculture, which potentially might require greater land area. However, obviously, we know there's a lot of returns from regenerative agriculture. The coherence of the framework now is there, which through having both a land area target and a land quality target, we can capture potentially some of those outcomes that we were trying to not incentivize last time around.
Wonderful. Well, Thank you to everyone. I think we've covered all of the major questions that we had. So a huge thank you to the Land Hub and congratulations to all of the collaborating partners and members of the Land Hub for this major development and major milestone towards the version 2 of the land methods. As we close, want to thank everyone for your interest in helping us develop and iterate our methods and our science. Please do contribute through the public consultation. And just emphasizing again, we are talking about the next version of the land methods, version 2, but there is no reason to wait right now. So if you go to our website, you can still access and use our version 1 land methods to get started now setting science-based targets. And that work will only grow with the publication of the version 2 methods. So again, encourage everyone to take action now. For those of you that are following along or have asked additional questions that we haven't covered live, we will be sharing back additional Q&A responses via the webinar follow-up materials, which is going to be sent to all registrants along with the webinar recording. So thank you again, everyone, and please engage in this public consultation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.